Good morning, Wise Tribe, and welcome to Anju Asks. I'm here with Dr. Oberdan Marianetti. Hi, Dr. O.
Good morning.
We're talking about, at the beginning of New Year, renewal and creating new patterns of behavior and new habits, but how do you actually make them stick? So Dr. O has some great insight and advice on how to make this new path for ourselves. Thank you for joining us, Dr. O.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the blocks, the challenges, the obstacles that people face when they're trying to turn over a new leaf and create a new habit to better ourselves?
Sure. Habits are automated behaviors that have been conditioned enough in our being that operate and activate from the unconscious, and we don't necessarily have to think about too much to implement. When we're trying to create new habits, one of the things that happens is that we're often pushing against existing habits that we're trying to replace, which of course are automatic and strongly embedded, and it makes it difficult to counter. And what we usually engage in is what I call cravings. And there are certain types of behaviors that have been conditioned in ourselves that are designed to keep us away from really looking at what's happening within, really looking and understanding what our needs are, and ultimately help us drive towards our fuller potential, our better version, the better version of ourselves, and fulfilling the being that we are designed to be. A way in which I've framed these behaviors that block us from implementing new habits is the concept of cravings.
Okay.
And I've established 4 key questions to ask ourselves as a litmus test to identify whether any of these behaviors we suspect might be stopping us is indeed one such block. The first question is, do I actively pursue this behavior?
Mm-hmm.
The answer might be yes or no. Second question, when I engage in this behavior, does it provide me with a temporary sense of pleasure or relief? And again, yes or no. Third question, if I stick with this behavior and I continue enacting it, will it have negative consequences for me over the long term?
Right.
Fourth and final question, have I tried to give up this behavior before and have failed and gone back to old habits? If the answer to all 4 questions is a yes, it is likely that this behavior is what I call a craving, and it is likely that it is stopping you from implementing a new desired behavior. So what are some of these behaviors? If you paid attention to the type of questions, you'll recognize that, for example, addictions fall into that realm.
Yeah.
And so if I have a habit of drinking excessively, it's a behavior I seek. It gives me temporary pleasure or relief when I drink. I know that over the long term I have negative consequences for me, and I may have tried to give it up, but I keep going back to drinking. But of course it's not limited to drinking.
Yeah.
There are other types of addictive and habitual behaviors that can hinder our progress, including behaviors that we often consider to be positive. So for example, nobody would frown upon working as a potential behavior that blocks us from achieving our full potential. But you might realize that too can become excessive. Reading, learning, romance, love, as well as other classic addictions, sexual, gambling, and any other type of substance behavior. So
Yes.
these can be some of the blocks, but I would invite the audience to expand their definition of what habitual behaviors can block us to include the positive behaviors that actually could be blocking us from getting to our desired outcomes.
It's really helpful to have a framework like that. Actually, I love those 4 questions, and it actually brought to mind a few things that I might look to address that fall into that category as well. So if we know that we're doing these things because they're habits, and we know perhaps that we shouldn't be doing them, we want to get past them. We've got those good intentions. Why is it so difficult to get past those habits and those blocks and those cravings, as you call them? Is it so deep-seated? Why do we find it so hard?
It is deep-seated. If you have a driving license or know how to drive a bicycle, you can immediately get a sense of how automated the behavior is. Cast your mind back to when you first sat in a car for your first driving lesson, everything being so new and overwhelming because there's so many variables at play all at once. Today you can jump in the car, start the engine and drive and have no thought around what you are actually doing. And in fact, sometimes we drive so automatically that we become mindless to the experience. We go from A to B, and once we arrive, we ask ourselves, how did I get here? So habits operate from an unconscious part of our brain. They've been rehearsed so much that ultimately become embedded in our unconscious mind and operate in an automated way. What is difficult in replacing those behaviors, number one, is that they are habitual and unconscious, and number two is that when they become ingrained, it is the easiest path to resistance to anything that we want to do, and the brain has a desire to operate from an easiest path as possible. So when we are trying to change behaviors, we're not only, let's imagine this is baseline 0 and the existing behaviors is at this level of intensity, and it's been rehearsed for years from the past, and it's very strongly embedded. We are starting from 0 with the new desired behavior, and it will take quite a long time, quite a lot of repetition, quite a lot of practice for the new behavior to build hard enough to eventually equal or surpass the old behavior and effectively replace it. Often people make the mistake to try and stop the old behavior as their strategy to change, but actually it's easier to create a new behavior and stick with it enough that it eventually surpasses the old ones than to try and reduce the existing ingrained rooted behavior. The second reason why it's so difficult is because these behaviors, however addictive and or damaging they may be, are often designed to soothe and protect. And so whether we realize it or not, these cravings were implanted in our way of being at a time where usually as children we didn't have the resources to come up with a strategy that as adults we can create. And so in our limited understanding of the world and its complexity, our little brains came up with the strategies that we thought were useful, and therefore created it as a habit to stay protected from trauma, to soothe ourselves from pain and abuse of any kind. And the sad part is that these strategies then become habitual and embedded, and we carry them forward, transforming them slightly in adulthood until it becomes a new habit that we are now contended with.
So it feels good, and that's why it's so hard to stop.
Indeed.
I understand that. And you touched on something really interesting that you said just there, that it's not just about stopping cold, but it's about building on a new behavior. So can you tell us a little bit more about how can we actually get past this now that we know what the things are that we want to be stopping and why we're doing it and why we can't, but then how do we move forward? That's a really key part.
The two answers to that, one very short and one a little bit more elaborate. The very short answer is practice, 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 practice. Habits are formed through repetition, and therefore whatever it is that we are trying to create as a new habit, as a new behavior, it needs to be practiced and rehearsed ad nauseum. And the second answer is a little bit more elaborate, and is the idea that any type of change, behavioral in this case, is like embarking on a new journey. And for the journey to be successful, it requires a range of ingredients that must be in place and interact with each other smoothly. First, we need to be motivated to get on the journey. Many of us have all the tools and the means to step onto this journey and make it a successful endeavor, and yet lack the motivation to get started.
Yeah.
There could be many reasons why that is the case. I'm not going to dive into it right now, but figuring out our why is a key to sticking with any behavior. Like we're in January, people make New Year resolutions. Some of your audience might be going through dry January.
Yes.
And the idea of figuring out why am I doing this, what are the benefits that I'm hoping to achieve is very, very important, and the first step of setting off on a journey. Second, I find that when people start a journey, they often spend an inordinate amount of time to figure out their destination, which of course is very useful, but very little to no time to figure out where are they starting from.
Right.
And if there's any sailors in the audience, you know, you cannot chart a course unless you have both points. You cannot chart a course by only knowing your destination. And so great that you want to understand what it would look like when you get there, but it's equally important to understand what is my starting point, what is my starting condition, so that I can move to step 3, which is figuring out a plan. And the plan is the important part, very important part of enacting any change, because it implies that you are visualizing the steps of the journey and the things that you might encounter along the way, which will then inform questions like, do I need new skills? Do I need new knowledge? Do I need a support mechanism or a power team around me to help me go through this journey, given that I may encounter these, that, or the other obstacles along the way? It's very, very important to visualize those steps so that we can prepare and acquire the right tools to get onto the journey. And the final point, which I have already hinted at, few spend time considering, who do I need along this journey?
Right.
No man is an island, no woman is an island. Even if we're doing a solo experience, like, I don't know, crossing the Arctic on foot, we still need the team behind to prepare us, to support us, to jump in case of emergency. And it doesn't matter how small the habit that you're trying to create is, it is very, very likely that we will falter. It is very normal and natural to expect that at some point the old habit will kick in and we will take those 1 or 2 steps backwards. So the analogy of a journey for me is a nice way of summarizing the importance of all aspects of behavioral change so that we can be prepared for what comes.
Definitely, I think preparedness is everything, and actually you mentioned quite a few things that I hadn't even considered before. It's really important to consider the 360 of what you're doing. It's a really powerful analogy actually, and so sticking with that, the journey and the path that we're about to embark on, and you mentioned sometimes you might falter and veer off that wide road that you're envisaging to get to your destination. What do you do when you take a misstep? Perhaps you fall back into the old pattern, or you want to and you don't know what to do when you have that urge. How do you course correct?
I think there's a few answers to that. One is around mindset, and I noticed that often people, when engaging in a journey of change, take a all or nothing approach to it.
Right.
And therefore expect perfection and success at every step of the way, not realizing that perhaps that actually it is quite natural for any kind of journey to present challenges that we didn't expect and for which we weren't prepared. So mindset and the acceptance, and maybe even the knowledge that it is natural for any journey to have those challenges and setbacks, where at times we might fall and falter and step back onto our journey, and accepting that that is okay. That would be my first answer to the question. The second one, and probably more importantly, as a psychotherapist, I see how often people beat themselves up even when their cheerleading team is telling them, hey, it's okay, this is natural, you've taken 10 steps forward, 2 steps back, are not a big deal, keep going. And despite the support mechanism, despite the fact that this is natural to fall and falter, the inner critic kicks in such powerful ways that it robs us of so much of the resources that actually we could put to good use for the journey.
Right.
Whether it is emotional or physical or sometimes even mental resources that go towards dealing with this often vicious inner critic that floods us with shame and makes us feel like a failure for stepping back onto this journey. And so the remedy there really is self-compassion. It's to act with kindness towards ourselves, accepting that being human means being imperfect and flawed and incomplete, and that too is okay, and that we can always tap back into the gifts and the resources that God has provided us with, and we can of course always tap into the support mechanisms that the people hopefully we have surrounded with can provide, or professionals if necessary, and use those inner and outer resources to get back up and continue on the journey, knowing for sure there will be more challenges, and that too is okay, and we can continue forward.
Absolutely. I love that you say it's about self-compassion. I think it's so important to recognize that if you want to go the distance, if you're going on a long journey, there will be pitfalls. It's normal, and you have to recognize that that's okay. I think that's a big part of the preparation before you set off, to know that will happen along the way. Be prepared for that. It's okay. On a long journey, you want these things to stick, these habits, these new actions to stick. So it's going to be hard. Recognizing that is so important, as important as probably knowing what your destination is. Thank you so much, Dr. O. I love the idea that it's a long journey, and every day is a new chance as well. So you can get there step by step with the support, the resources, getting to know yourself better and how you're going to make this work. I've learned so much today. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here.